Picture this, a massive capital city with paved pathways, organized buildings, classical architecture like colosseums and pantheons, and way more boroughs than they probably need. What you're imagining right now is the apparently utopic city of Falconia that exists as the sole safe haven for humanity in the current world of Berserk. On the surface, Falconia appears to be exactly what it's billed as being, a perfect civilization where all humans live in peace and harmony and where they never want for anything that they don't already have. But when you take a look beneath the surface, a dark secret starts to reveal itself. Though the leader of Falconia, Griffith, wants all his citizens to think that they're now residing in the only place safe for them in the whole wide world, in reality, they're probably closer to imminent danger than they realize. That's because Falconia wasn't created to keep human beings protected from the vices of the new world. It functions more like an animal pen at a slaughterhouse, with the head butcher busy playing God's favorite instead. There is a very dark reason behind the existence of Griffith's capital city, and we're gonna break it all down in this video. But first, let's talk about the city itself, the Majesty of the city of Falconia. Before we dive into the dark secret of Falconia, let's talk about the city itself, because what it achieves in its short existence is pretty astounding. Falconia literally emerges from the bowels of the earth towards the conclusion of the great roar of the astral world, appearing as a city as if ordered for the Falcon of Light himself. When Minister Foss first sees the city, he thinks that it must be the legendary capital city of Supreme King Gaiseric, said to be sleeping beneath Wyndham itself. If you guys don't know about the fall of King Gaiseric's empire, we suggest you check out our video on that. But the long and short of it is that Gaiseric's empire collapsed in a single night, and its remains were buried underneath the Tower of Rebirth. Minister Foss's assumption here wouldn't exactly be incorrect, because the Tower of Rebirth is located in Wyndham after all, but he dismisses it all the same because the sheer scale of Falconia is ridiculous. We get a delightful frontal POV of the new capital of humanity, and it is absolutely massive. The front walls are decorated with visages of griffins, soldiers in ancient battle armor, and many angelic wings. Beyond those walls lies the city, which is a sprawling mess of classical architecture, including a pantheon and a colosseum, which are somehow reduced to being mere landmarks as opposed to the hulking behemoths of our world. And beyond even that lay an absolutely huge castle shaped in the figure of a falcon in flight. This castle dwarfed every other structure in the city underneath it by a country mile, and was at least 4 times the size of the front walls of the city itself. Foss correctly states that the city was too huge to be man-made, and that's when the pontiff of the Holy See chimes in by calling that an appropriate sign. In the pontiff's mind, the Falcon of Light, Griffith, was not a human being. He was a divine savior sent to this earth to protect the lambs of God. So to him, it was only appropriate that the Falcon's capital city not be that man-made monstrosity of yesteryear, but an angelic blessing where he shall reign supreme from. The pontiff is the one who gives this new capital the name Falconia, and just as he does that, Griffith appears from the skies on Zod's palm and directs his subjects to their new home with a single point of the finger. Sadly, Berserk went into the curse of all anime and mangas after this moment, as we followed the Black Swordsman party for the better part of 3 years on an accursed boat arc. But when we came back, the claims about Falconia being a veritable paradise for humanity were proven true. In chapter 333, we followed Rickert and Erica on their journey to Falconia, and immediately you can see why the chapter itself was titled Paradise. In the immediate aftermath of Griffith's battle with Ganishka, we saw the dead emperor's body become the power source for the world spiral tree, and his countless pseudo-spawn's bodies turn into numerous smaller trees that dotted what was once a battlefield. In the time that has passed since, it appears that Griffith has done some cleaning, because now the lands outside Falconia aren't covered with withered trees, they're covered in wingstones. These crystalline stones, which get their name from their wing-like shape, are allegedly the reason that no evil creatures can approach the main city of Falconia. As you move closer to the city itself, you will encounter fields upon fields of crops blooming in harvest, and dozens of people hard at work collecting this blessed bounty of the earth. According to General Laban, the grounds in and around Falconia are currently locked in a perpetual state of harvest. You plant anything in these lands and it will grow under the best possible conditions. This means that Falconians would practically never run out of food as long as they kept tilling the earth, which many of them seemed eager to do. According to Laban, and many other Falconians apparently, this perma-harvest season was a blessing bestowed upon them by the world spiral tree, and they have no idea how right and wrong they are at the same time, but more on that later. From the outside, Falconia is impressive enough, and if the wingstones work the way Laban claims they do, then it would indeed be the only suitable stronghold for keeping humans safe from evil astral creatures in the entire world. But somehow, Falconia was even more impressive on the inside. The main entrance to Falconia is large enough to fit a castle tower in it, but the city beyond is something else. Falconia is structured and planned so well that even a genius inventor and innovator like Rickert can't help but marvel at its civilization. The streets are all paved and the buildings are all permanent and duly organized to make life easier for everyone living in the city. The marketplaces are huge and people are assigned living quarters and jobs and guilds according to their capabilities. What this basically means is that there is a place and a job for everyone in Falconia, which is, frankly speaking, ridiculous. To be able to cater to that many people, you need an insane level of bureaucracy, and well, turns out Griffith thought of that as well. When you first arrive in Falconia, you are sent into the Refugee Bureau, where you are registered into the city as a resident. Then, you're assigned living quarters, which are usually overlooked by people who have experience running a business, like Luca. If you're lucky, you'll get recommendations for work in one of the many guilds of Falconia, and if you're really lucky, you might even be granted a pass for an audience with the Falcon of Light himself. Turns out, Rickert was a really lucky boy because he got both of those things when he arrived in Falconia, but more on that later. Besides having brilliant architecture, the city also had brilliant city planning. Falconia had running water, functional drains and sewers, and actual honest-to-God public baths that were so big that you could fit an entire city in them. Traffic flow in the city was excellent, despite its incredible scale and the population having been at war with each other a short while ago. Everyone seemed to get along. Rickert was shocked when he saw Kushan in the city that used to be Wyndham, but by the time he got acquainted with Falconia, even he understood what united all these people and made them work so earnestly day in and day out. Because Falconia is not just a wondrous city because of its architecture, its people are just as peculiar. Falconians are uncannily motivated to go about their lives as if they had all just learned their purpose and were now striving towards realizing that purpose even at the cost of their lives. Rickert notes that everyone in the blacksmith and craftsman guilds that he was recommended to worked with a passion he had literally never seen before, and later he again notes that the reason Falconians are so lively and united is most likely their divine leader, Griffith. And speaking of Griffith, let's talk about him as well, because that man ordered the drippiest fantasy castle we've ever seen for himself following the great roar of the astral world. Calling the Falcon's castle an abomination would probably be correct, because no castle pathway should be wide enough to allow whole carriages to enter, even if they rode abreast of one another. The exterior of the castle, as we've already mentioned, looks like a falcon in flight, but when you reach the castle, you see that there are actually scores of falcons and other birds of prey flying around the top, as if on a pilgrimage. And that wording is probably not even an exaggeration, because the Falcon's castle is where everything important goes down. In the lavish main hall, the Falcon of Light himself performs the funeral ceremony for all his citizens, with the Pope and the Princess in attendance as well. After sending their souls to rest, Griffith then retires to the yard for afternoon tea in a gazebo that is surrounded by flowers planted by Princess Charlotte herself. All of Griffith's main confidants seem to reside in the castle. Sir Owen is the head of the castle guard. Sonia is now a high-ranking member of the Holy See. Charlotte and His Holiness are key to his legitimacy as a ruler, and his war demon generals were always available at his beck and call. The council chamber of Falconia is where the former ministers of the Royal Court of Midland now convene to discuss matters related to the governance of city and kingdom, with Griffith a part of the council as well, since he was the leader of Midland's regular army, the Band of the Falcon. Falconia also has an absolutely massive harbor surrounded by a curtain wall off to one side of the Falcon's castle, and it appears as though the world spiral tree sprouts from within the castle itself. So, a city with an unending harvest, harmonious population, and a charismatic leader who can actually put dead souls to rest and unite multiple groups of men with his mere presence. Falconia sounds like the place to be by every metric, so why did we say the city has a dark secret? Well, the answer, as always, lies in its history. Because while Minister Foss might have dismissed his notion of Falconia being Geiseric's sunken city as soon as it popped up in his mind, we didn't. And we're glad we didn't, because our worst fears were confirmed when Guts & Co. reached Elfhelm. Ever since we first saw Falconia rise out of the ground like a friggin' Edo Tensei summon, we were suspicious of its purpose, and it turns out we were right to be. It's nothing more than a massive sacrificial pen for the blind sheep that are men, the real reason for Falconia's creation. In chapter 53, one of the most pivotal chapters in Berserk's continuity, we get a small history lesson about the Kingdom of Midland and how it came to be. 1,000 years ago, the realm of man was divided into dozens of warring tribes and city-states in what was known as the Age of Warlords. Then, one day, a man by the name of Griffith appeared on the world stage from out of nowhere and managed to subjugate all of humanity under his rule. Because of his vicious fighting style, he got nicknames like the Demon King or the King of Galloping Death, but his best-known moniker was the Skull King, thanks to the skull-shaped battle helmet he always wore when riding to war. Eventually, Griffith erected a massive capital city that encompassed all the land that is now known as the Kingdom of Midland. That's right, his capital was so huge that it encompassed an entire kingdom's worth of space. Griffith made his capital in the middle of all the lands he had conquered, and so his capital city came to be known as Midland. That means that every major Midland site we've seen in the story, Windham, Doldry, the Tower of Conviction, etc., used to all lie in a single city 1,000 years ago. But this massive accomplishment of his was not achieved without more than a few casualties. According to fables and legends about Griffith's reign, he had the city constructed by the very people he had captured and conquered as Supreme King, and he worked many people to death for it. He then started imposing exorbitant tax rates on his subjects, and his capital city became known as a den of pleasure and gluttony. Eventually, God himself could no longer take the king's excesses, and he sent down his cardinal angels to teach him a lesson. In a single night, Griffith's ancient capital was destroyed with thunder and earthquakes, and the ruins of that city were now buried underneath the Tree of Rebirth, as we mentioned earlier. This story persists on in the world of Berserk as nothing more than a fable, which is probably why Minister Foss so readily dismissed the notion of Falconia being Griffith's sunken city. But thanks to chapter 53 and chapter 345, we know that's not the case. Princess Charlotte claims that while the stories about the downfall of Griffith's empire might be inaccurate, his city at least did exist, and it lay sleeping in the abyssal hole that was present inside the Tower of Rebirth. Her claims were verified in chapter 345 by the Archmage Guru Gedfring himself, who confirmed through his scryings that Falconia was in fact Griffith's city brought back to life. Chapter 53 also gives us visual proof of its claims when it follows Casca's dropped torch into the sleeping hole of Griffith's city, and we see it illuminate ruins that look much like the architecture we've seen in Falconia. But this is also where that dark secret we mentioned comes into play, because when that torch hits the bottom of the hole, it illuminates dozens of corpses all marked with the brand of sacrifice on their foreheads, which is our only real hint that Griffith's city did not fall to divine providence, it fell to demonic intervention. And this idea is confirmed in chapter 362 when we get a snippet of that downfall through the POV of none other than King Griffith himself. As Guts views the blood memory of the final moments of Skull Knight's human life, we see an absolute hellscape in front of our eyes. Thousands upon thousands of writhing tentacles cover what look like buildings and streets, and the abyss itself lurks in the background. 5 demonic figures stand atop what looks like a closed fist, with one of them being the God Hand Void. If we take all the clues we've gotten from the story so far about its nature and happenings, then a rather grim image appears in front of us. If Griffith's city fell due to the God Hand and causality is in fact a spiral like his good friend Flora claims it is, then what happened 1,000 years ago might just be destined to happen again. Griffith is a God Hand, first and foremost. Falconians might not notice this in amongst his flashy hair and easy smile and generous developmental proposals aimed towards prosperity, but we aren't mesmerized by his magnetic ode. The true reason for Falconia's creation is revealed in chapter 358, when Griffith claims he wants to create a second empire of man. And if you've been following us this far, you know where we're going next. While no one is sure about how Griffith's empire fell, everyone knows it once existed, and so the Council of Falconia just takes Griffith at his word and starts preparing plans for his proposals. If they knew that it had become a sacrificial pen for demonkind towards its end, they'd probably be less enthusiastic about following the orders of an actual demon king. The most important structure in Falconia is not its colosseums or pantheons or public baths or even the Falcon's castle. It's Pandemonium. The massive dome that houses the apostles is consciously separated from the rest of the city because Griffith knows if he lets them near his human subjects, they might just expose him as a demon himself. When Sir Locus introduces Rickert to Pandemonium, he tries to make the place sound like a paradise for brutes like him, but his words before that reasoning hold the truth of an apostle's nature. Locus claims that Falconians think Pandemonium exists as an apostle combat training ground, but the truth is that his men would likely go insane without bloodshed and slaughter. On multiple occasions, we've heard war demons pine about not eating human flesh, and if all does flow as if parallel to that time, as Skull Knight believes it does, then the endpoint of this journey of salvation for Falconians is sadly a one-way ticket to hell. Griffith is already sending the souls of those who died in his service to the Abyss, and now that he's raised Geiseric City again, he might be planning to perform another infernal ritual like the one at St. Albion, or on that very city's grounds, 1,000 years ago. If history is fated to repeat itself, then the only logical outcome is the demonic sacrificial ritual to end all demonic sacrificial rituals. And what better place to do it than Falconia, the home of humanity's actual first demon king? Flora claimed causality was a spiral because she believed that people choose their fates themselves, and that even an individual's actions could disrupt the current of causality if they resisted its flow strongly enough. This is true in the case of Guts, who has been escaping death since he was born, but that doesn't mean that the context surrounding that defiance of fate would be changed entirely out of a compounding effect. Guts' status as a leaping fish in the current of causality can only be claimed at a temporal junction point. Up until that point appears, he has no choice but to flow with causality, and in the case of the sacrifice of Falconia, the death of its citizens might just be a way to get to that point in the first place. This city, which has given humans reason beyond comprehension and life without a bounded existence, will end up becoming their coffin, and there's probably no way to stop that from happening other than struggling against Griffith's absoluteness. Marvelous verdict. But as for this video, that's gonna have to be it. Well, we would love to spend a weekend in Falconia admiring the architecture, the world spiral tree, the vibrancy of the city, and Luca herself. We wouldn't want to stick around in it for too long because we know what it was built upon. When Rickert reaches Falconia, even after slapping Griffith for his transgressions against his own comrades, he cannot entirely bring himself to leave the city. It was true that Falconia was a veritable utopia for its masses of blind sheep who bleated at the beck and call of their avian leader. It was also true that Erica would be safest within Falconia's walls. But Rickert makes up his mind to leave the city anyway, precisely because of said transgressions against his comrades. He slapped Griffith because he had the gall to ask him if he'd join him again instead of regretting the deaths of their shared comrades. He knew that Falconia had been erected upon the blood of his band members, and knowing that, he could never live in the city in the first place. The people of Falconia blindly follow Griffith, and that's why he can control them the way he does. If they found out the numerous atrocities Griffith had committed to get where he was, they'd likely turn on him in a heartbeat. But that will never happen, which is why Falconia's dark secret will end up being its downfall. But what do you guys think? Is Griffith cooking up another Eclipse-style ritual with a dash of the incarnation ceremony thrown in for good measure in his new capital city? Let us know what you think in the comments down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one.